I looked over the massive weapon that was on the rack as the angry scientist, Cassian, was preparing to go over all the features he had crafted into it. Cassian was pointing with that little stick of his at the pieces and parts with a pride and eagerness as he was setting everything up, softly preparing for his presentation. I couldn't blame him. I'd given him the rough specs on the weapon and my requirements for its features and capabilities over 1,000 years ago, and he, by his own admission, had only finished it a handful of decades ago. He'd probably spent another decade on this very presentation, so I was going to let him have his moment. He had most definitely earned it. Sergeant, as you requested, you'll have a single 4-round burst and full auto fire modes, 4 acceleration modes, 2 for atmospheric and 2 for vacuum use. One of them will be for range and accuracy, of course, and the other for damage and destruction. The light in his eyes made it clear he was only getting warmed up. You'll have up to 600 rounds a minute. You're looking at roughly 5 miles in atmo, 15 in vacuum. Baseline for the damage mode, I mean. 10 times that for the distance mode, roughly. Environments vary. He was going to make me ask about the important parts, or he was going to go into very great detail about the other features of the weapon. With a barrel length of 5 foot, you're going to be able to hit whatever you aim at, and with 3-inch diameter, 5-inch long slugs, whatever you hit is not going to be the same after, if it even still exists. The mass conversion to plasmatic explosive force on impact shouldn't leave much behind, if you're using that feature, of course. Then I assume the Procry Matter slug and propellant replicator did work out after all. How many materials do I have access to? How many projectiles am I going to be able to reconstruct, and how fast? This hypothetical system had been an obsession of Cassian's for years before I met him, and the heuristic I was able to share with him was able to let him close the gap to his goal. This weapon system was his repayment of my assistance. A masterpiece of Chrystech and Teltech fused. You know it! You'll have a total of 9 round materials. Steel, alloy iron, alloy moon steel, alloy meteor iron, alloy star metal, 2 separate forms of crystal substrate. You'll be able to maintain a full fire rate with only needing roughly 6 seconds for a full 60 round clip reconfiguration. The nano-adaptive munition system will be able to keep up with fire rate without issue. It will also be able to customize the type of round created via preloaded parameters, with some ability to adapt on the fly. So, as long as the power requirements can be met, this thing is good to go. But of course, that's your problem. Yes it is. And unless they count differently in Teltechian, that's only 8 materials, Cassian. I was smiling. I knew he had something to show. Yes, the final one is a bit special. Let me show you. He slid open the compartment that held the base storage, showing where the 8 other solid material slugs were, with a 9th chamber sealed with a special cap. Instead of converting into explosive plasmatic force, this will convert all extra energies into more of the matter that the round is alloyed to. That means every time you hit some, it will spread around the target and seal them, and then thicken with each additional round. A standard 4-round burst should cover and seal any size class 3 target, and only give minor kinetic damage transfer. Of course, you can configure the material to then explode depending on the settings you input. The only problem is it takes 10 seconds a slug to create. That means 5 minutes for a full clip. It also takes 20 times the energy to operate and produce that ammunition. That is more than acceptable, Cassian. You've outdone yourself on this account. But what of the celestial augments? And what is the alloy material. Is it uniform against the other materials? He was beaming. Yeah, uniform T4 uni alloys. You'll have full augmentation abilities, including your celestial energies. T4 uni? That's impressive. Where the hell did you get the materials for that? Cassian looked a bit hesitant, standing behind the weapon rack beginning to pack it up for transport back to the Night Rock. It was the oddest thing. A gentleman contacted us and sold off 30 Type 4 unis. More than enough for the base munition stock and all the various systems in the weapon. With a little bit left over, to be fair. And for far less for market value. More I think about it, way less. I was so overjoyed with the acquisition I didn't think to question it at the time. It was still an extraordinary amount of money, but I owed it to you. This was a bothersome development, as it smelled of outside interference. It's fine. Just tell me you're still your paranoid self and have something more than that to fill me in with. At this he smiled, and tossed a small, hand-sized infotome to me. Of course, Sarge. I'm just glad you're not mad at me. I didn't show anything about it to anyone. I wouldn't do that. They were never on the ship. This was just a direct transfer via cog. Activating the infotome and looking at the images stored within, and taking a moment to look at the odd man who had made this deal, I noticed the knots in his braids. Then I noticed the room he sat in. I made a decision at that point. I sent a signal to Navi to prepare to make best possible speed back to the home realm. And I stood, quite the rush, startling the codesmith as he was going about his work. Cassian, you've done great. Now, get that packed and sent to my ship. After that, pack up yourself. You need to relocate and go to ground. 5 years. Don't break cover for 5 years, my friend. I hope I'm being paranoid, but there may be some problems. Don't worry. I'll reach out if I can give an all clear before that. Yes, of course, Sarge. How bad did I just mess things up? He was nervous. Reasonably so. This project had been of the top security and importance to me when I brought it to him all those years ago. But, for once, he hadn't messed things up. Clumsy he may be, but he was loyal and a good man. You didn't. You did everything right. There are just some other matters at play that may be intersecting. It appears someone just left me an invitation, and it would be rude if I did not accept it. With that, I got up and made my way to the dock, and knew my weapon system would be there before I was. Now, it was time to go to work. It looked like there was a reviver to hunt. Thus, a tally to even from many brothers lost. We had more than enough time before we needed to start choosing our first mission for the client. We just had to make this quiet and quick. The unit would be less than happy about this, but would make this happen once I made my case. You see, the revivers were like ghosts in the fog. Many say they don't even exist. However, I was sure that this one was not making some sort of mistake by giving me such detailed information via the imagery and recording he had sent to Cassian. Thus, I knew where he'd sent the Chris from, and it was Fortress. And if it came to it, it'd be a good test of the new gear. By the 9 and 4, welcome once more to the library, where today we're going to look into a shadowy and little understood but mostly theorized organization. That organization being called the Revivers. Now, as I mentioned, it is a shadowy organization, supposedly with no ties to any sovereignty or other power within the realms. Thus, this is not going to be so much an exhaustive review as a probe into the various oddities that surround this potential organization. In fact, records placing the name Revivers to this group and series of activities we will go into are near non-existent, but persist within rumor. But the effect of this supposed group are undeniable, and when looked at in a historical hindsight, quite clear. It is a pattern of secrets, suppression, and murder. By analysis, this began soon during the Age of Mortals, within centuries of Vanson's defeat by the heroes. From that point forward, disappearances and deaths over the years of those trying to research or investigate ruined and lost Analar artifacts. In particular, anything to do with what we would call today Crystech. Over that age and well into the age of respite and reunion millennia later, advancement into the Crystech arts was slow for a huge amount of the realms. The only major change being with Criterion's foundation. And even upon analysis and review, even their spread and advancement within the realms of Crystech was slower than it could have, or arguably should have, been. These patterns would seem to indicate that some sort of organization was retarding and slowing the rate of Crystech advances via assassinations and kidnappings. However, also of note, several points in Jamamar's history during these ages, in times of great stress or great calamity, strange advanced forces have come out of nowhere to save the day, sometimes working in conjunction with other heroes, sometimes completely out of the blue, before they just rapidly fade away without any explanation. While details are scant and very few sketches or other imagery exist of these forces in these incidents, strangely enough, a battlefield does not tend to be a place an artist wishes to stop to make a sketch. Funny that. These forces are reported to sport weapons and equipment that are unknown to the rest of the world. On hindsight, these appear to be Crystech of various states of advancement. So, it would appear that this organization, or whatever group it is not just a hoarder of this advanced tech, but also capable of applying it to great effect as well. However, after the Wars of the Spark, and the Criterion Nation's foundation and their own spreading of Crystech, slow as it may have been, going on for millennia by the Wars of the Spark, it would appear that the pattern of covert actions that would be attributed to the supposed revivers ceased for the most part. Some say at this point the organization may have met an end of some sort, either being absorbed by some other force or otherwise finding the end of its existence. It is reasonable from the evidence available to me to say that if they did exist, the revivers most likely were some form of secret society that probably had membership across the world, most likely operating with some sort of central base. All that tech had to go somewhere, and factories for building the devices created had to have a base. However, no evidence that can be discerned to the location of such a place has been uncovered. This group seems to perhaps been formed from a scholarly basis, maybe looking to preserve and understand those artifacts of the NLR, only to have this group to evolve into a paramilitary organization that sought to hold a monopoly on the secrets they held, whether for ill or for good. This group seemed to be able to act and move with great speed and security, having been recorded at multiple battles that have occurred around or near Polaron. These are significant because each time afterwards they were able to leave without any answers being given and no pursuit recorded. This would seem to mean whoever the group that is titled the Revivers were, they enjoyed the protection, or at least the patronage of grand forces. However, with the advent of the Skytear incident and the Age of Stars that followed, the name Reviver has come up more and more to those who have the connections and interest, particularly where it concerns Criterion and its citizens. This is because the Revivers are rumored to have been involved with the force that faced Criterion on the day of the Skytear. This is further augmented by the fact that there are active bounties outstanding from Criterion nobles and others on any such person that is associated with Revivers. However, these bounties have been open since the Skytear incident itself, and seem to be as likely as a bounty out for a ghost. But, like I said, these are rumors, and the name Reviver still does not seem to have ever been tied to anyone in particular. No individual proven beyond a reasonable doubt as being one of these Revivers. Further clouding the waters on this strange affair, the only thing that seems to be known about the Revivers and how to identify them is that they apparently, or supposedly, use a series of knots as their ranking system and insignia, worn somewhere on the person. Now, this is not nearly as useful as one might think, as knotwork has always been a very common thing within the fashion, traditions, and customs of the realms, and has been for nearly all of its history. So, if there were such a system in place, it would be very effective at being nearly impossible to look for unless you knew exactly what it was. However, without some insider coming forth to reveal the secrets of Reviver knotwork, we will most likely never know. However, in the Age of Stars, there is no evidence that this organization still exists if it ever did. And while there is clear evidence that technology's advance was hampered for ages, to be fair and intellectually honest, it is also not inconsistent with inter-sovereignty clandestine actions. One power trying to keep the other powers from advancing too much too quickly. Further, making things very hard to determine is the lack of any sort of records one way or the other. Most of the tellings of events used to form this entry are second and third hand. Others are mentioned as parts of clearly exaggerated epics, bar stories, and family legends. All of this makes things very hard to clearly delineate. However, the actions of certain agents of the Cryston state of Criterion have kept this rumor mill going for ages. Perhaps more will be uncovered about this shadowy organization, or of the groups whose actions are attributed to it. If I shall come across any such thing, I will report any such findings post-haste. However, with this brief look at the rumors, and understood hearsay and information about the Revivers over, and before you visit me again here in the library, My prospective patrons, thank you for your time and your attention. Now, by the 9 and 4, be well, take care of yourselves and each other. A few minutes later, and I was sitting in my office on the ship, and was dealing with a very irate security officer. They aren't real, Sarge. You have to get over this obsession. Mazzy was actually yelling at me. Oh boy. The revivers have never been real. You are not going to embark on a mission operation on the home realm to just try and find a ghost. I will not allow it. It's too risky. For all of us, Sarge. To be fair, she was not saying anything that the rest of the crew didn't also echo in some degree. I knew I was in the minority in believing in the existence of the revivers. But I was privy to things that none of the rest of them were, and I knew what I had seen over the ages. But there was a better way to prove my point as for the need to us going. As she stood across the desk from me in my office, she stared at me. Her eyes were furious, but there was a searching, pleading in them as well, looking for logic and hoping that I had not been totally lost to a form of madness. Well, time to make my case. Mazzy, how much is a Type 4 Unicryst? How much would a lot of 30 go, if you had to guess? Her face scrunched, taking on a pondering look as she thought about it. It was obvious she didn't like where it was going, because these were very large numbers. Large enough to make my point. One of them would be about 4.2 million standard gold. So a lot of 30 would be, what, 120? Maybe 100 million at the bare minimum? I don't get what point that has, Sarge. The system we just picked up, the weapon system for my suit, I waved off the interruption before she could make it, used most of that material, and it was only traded for 3 normal Anis and about 5 million standard gold. That's only about 8.5 million Mazzy. For 120 million worth of very hard to refine Unicryst. Who else or what else could let it go for so little? And then let an image of themselves just happen to be captured and fall into my lap. I lifted the infotome out of my pocket and tossed it to her. She caught it with those cat-like reflexes she always had, flipped it on, looked at it, looked at me, and looked back at the infotome. Her eyes and face softening as she realized we were going to be going. She understood the same as I, even if it was a falsehood. Someone was trying to fake being one of the revivers to provoke some sort of response. We needed to check this out. That amount of money at play required at least some investigation. She looked up at me, face softer, and softly asked, "Are you absolutely sure you've properly figured out where in the home realm we need to go then? Even if it's in lawless territory, our presence with this ship could cause issue if we are not both surgical and efficient." Now this was the question I could answer. Yes, Mazzy, I am. I actually know the place personally. Her face scrunched up, looking at me oddly, head starting to cock to the side. I'll explain later. Been there a few times over the ages. However, I need you to inform the crew and get us on our way. Have no fear. I'll have a full order of operations for each of you within a few hours. I am not cutting quarters on this. This is going to be run just like any other operation. I might have an obsession, but it is not an obsession to the point of madness. I promise. Yes, sir. You know we are with you. Thank you for explaining. Of course. Masnoa? Dismissed. Dinner after we jump. She smiled broadly. Of course, Sarge. You can explain what this weapon is, then.